Hey guys, welcome back to Home Theater Gurus. This is episode 5. So in the last episode we looked at how to tell if a speaker is well designed by comparing the on axis and the off axis. Now again, we want the off axis to resemble the on axis, and we want the on axis to have a nice response, of course. We don't want, a bunch of variations in the response and things like that. So now that we understand how to tell if a speaker is well designed, we're going to go ahead and look at the speaker I'm going to use in the next episode when we go over down-firing speakers used for Atmos. So, again, as I've done in the past episodes, we're going to read one more time about Doby specifications for Atmos speakers. The overhead speaker should complement the frequency, response, output, and power handling capabilities of the listener level speakers. So again, what that means is, you have your bed layer, your mains, and your surrounds. You want everything to have a similar response. Okay, if ideally the same speaker. You can't get any closer in response to that. So let's look at the HTM12 just to remind everyone what a good speaker looks like, okay? And so you see here, the off axis really resembles the on axis. It's you're losing output off axis, but that's going to happen with any speaker as you move off of zero, or as you move off of the on axis, being right directly in front of the speaker. So there's nothing you can do about that. And also the same thing with the JBL 308 here and 305, the 3 series. They're very well designed. So that's going to be ideal. And so now let's take a look at the Volt 10. All right, now here you see the on axis doesn't look good. Honestly, it doesn't. No matter what the rumors are out there about it's a really good speaker. It sounds really good. The on axis leaves a lot to be desired. It's not pretty, okay? And then you look at the off axis. The off axis is all over the place, okay? The speaker doesn't sound the same as you sit in different seats or as you move off axis. It sounds like a different speaker because it is a different speaker. I mean, you're looking at the responses. There's no way if you took 30 degrees and you compared it to being on axis that you would think this is the same speaker. Both of those responses don't look good, but so this is kind of all over the place. It's a mess. But you have to remember this is using a paper cone woofer as a waveguide. You cannot compare that to a speaker like the HTM series that uses a COS waveguide that took a lot of people who got together and designed that. And when they designed that, they understood the importance of this off-axis response and how important it is to making a very, very good speaker, And you can't compare a woofer waveguide to something of that caliber, So it's kind of is what it is. And this isn't my opinion. I mean, you can see it right here. I mean, this is kind of a mess, this off axis. This would not be a speaker, as we talked about in the previous episode. If you're looking for quality sound and, you want that good on axis and you want that good off axis, you're not getting either one of those here. Okay, you don't have good on axis and you do not have, I hate to say it, I own these speakers. A lot of people own these speakers. It's bad. Off axis is just bad. Okay, sorry, it is what it is. You read the specs or the description of the Volt series, and it says wide horizontal dispersion. Now, of course, they're trying to sell this speaker, and there's a following for it. But you don't want a wide horizontal dispersion if this is what you're getting off axis. I mean, you don't want a monkey throwing poop at you at 100 degrees off axis. We don't want that. And who cares if it's wide? We want filet mignons being slung out there. We want something good. That having a wide, dispersion is not uncommon. I mean, if you want something really wide, get domes, or some of these other waveguides like the HTM series, very, very nice wide dispersion. We don't want just wide dispersion. We want a nice wide dispersion with good off axis. So some of those descriptive words are kind of very misleading. And a lot of people, including myself, when I got these 5 years ago, were, I didn't do my homework. I didn't understand some of the things I do now. We're all constantly learning, but it's one of those things where you need to kind of do your homework before you purchase stuff. Because if you take these volts, which I've done, you put them against like a Fusion 8, which I have Fusion 8s in my living room, or an HTM 12, which I have those too. It's laughable. It's laughable. Those other well-designed speakers destroy the volts, and they should. I mean, you look at the frequency response on and off axis. I mean, it's a joke. Okay. Now, I'm not saying the volts are bad speakers. Well, I mean, they're not great speakers. On axis, they don't sound that bad. Okay. And surround duty, sure, they're okay. But according to Doby, we want that same response as the rest of the bed layer, as our LCR. We want good speakers all the way around the room because we want the best quality. We don't want what's just, the rave of the online forums and stuff at the time. We actually want quality sound. So, and then, there's also the high output they claim. Well, yeah, they have high output on axis, but if you look at the on axis, it's pretty nasty. You got some nasty spikes and dips in it. But if you're using these for like downfiring speakers, they're no longer high output because you're listening so far off axis, and we're going to cover that here in the next episode. You may have heard, as far as the designer is concerned, or some other people too, they feel the Volt 8 is the better sounding volt of, the series. And if you look at the Volt 8, on and off axis, compared to the 10. Now, it is still a mess, once you get past 4K, 5K, it goes downhill just like the Volt 10. But the Volt 10 on axis has a horrible 5 dB dip at, 2500, 2.5K. There's a huge dip right there of 5 dB, it's on axis. Just a horrible dropout. That's why I said the on axis is not good. It's really sloppy. But the Volt 8 is much more linear, but now it's got a big huge drop out at about 5K. But at least it's above, pretty much the vocal range. So neither one of these speakers, Volt 8 or 10, are really good. Or looking at the responses that you can really say this is a speaker I want. But at least the Volt 8 is a lot more linear through the vocal range, where the Volt 10 has just a huge dropout right at 2500 hertz. So that's just another thing to think about. I mean, if you have to use the Volt, the Volt 8 is going to sound better. It's still not going to in any way compete with an HTM series, because you see what happens once the frequency response is being handed over to the compression driver, and then it's all up to that woofer waveguide to control dispersion, and it's just basically a fail. It's the woofer is doing a very, very poor job, but it is just a woofer. So between those two, if you had to choose, you would choose the Volt 8 just for, quality of sound through that vocal range. But remember, we're comparing speakers with actual waveguides, not a paper cone waveguide. And remember, when these sweeps were taken, these off axis and on axis, those are sweeps. They're playing, start out the bass and they get higher and higher. I would imagine they'll be even worse than that when that woofer cone is moving and there's highs going at the same time. I mean, because it's using that woofer to control the dispersion. So it could be even worse when it's actually being, when there's action happening than what you see on this graph. Because then basically your waveguide is shifting around and moving. So, I mean, I don't have any data to, but just thinking about it, your waveguide's moving back and forth and it's having to disperse those highs. So I would imagine it's going to be even worse than what you see here. So, anyway, just be careful what you read online. And, like we talked about in the previous episode, do your homework. Now, because I cannot in any way recommend anyone purchase the Volt series because of this, because there are so many other options that are similarly priced that actually give extremely good sound and extremely good on and off axis, especially, you have to remember the off axis, some of those reflections are good, a speaker like the Volt, those reflections you would want to absorb because the off axis is so poor. So, there's better options where you can actually use the off axis and the room would sound much more, spacious and enveloping, like the HTM series. Like if I had to do Atmos, and I wanted to stay with DIY, I would probably do, HTM 10s or 12s up front and maybe HTM 8s everywhere else for surrounds and Atmos on brackets. I mean, that would be an outstanding experience. I mean, or even if you, didn't want to go DIY, but you still want to stay cheap, something like the JBL 308, maybe for LCR, and 305s everywhere else. or even the 305s up front, but that 308 will give you a little more output, because you're sitting usually a little further away from the fronts as you are everything else. But I mean, something like those types of setups would be far, far better. I mean, just so the quality of sound would be on another level versus trying to do something like the Volts. And I do realize the Volts, talk about being on axis, they do have slanted cabinets that you can get. But you have to remember those slanted cabinets were made, kind of before Dolby Atmos really came on board or was popular. So those are really used for your surrounds, lifting them up a little bit, and they have just a little bit of angle. They're not a lot of angle. With Atmos, we need 50 degrees of angle to be on axis to our main listening position. So those little angle boxes on the ceiling aren't even going to come close to getting you on axis. But that's going to be for the next episode. So that's going to be it for this one. And I'm going to go ahead and get set up for the next one. But until then, guys, you have a good one, and I'll see you for episode 6.